first we're going to talk about the vulnerable narcissist side, right? Vulnerable narcissists are envious, they're jealous, resentful, and they carry a spirit of entitlement based upon their status quo that involves some type of disadvantage that they have in some form or another, right? And when you want to think about that, think of King Ahab, who wanted to take over Naboth's vineyard because his vineyard was right next door to his house, right? So that was his disadvantage, right? He had the status quo as king, but he felt he was disadvantaged, that it was a disadvantage because his vineyard was not close to his home, which is why he offered to buy Naboth's vineyard or give him a different one so that he could be entitled to the one that was closest to his home. But Naboth said no, right? So think in terms of that. Think of a person who feels entitled to their wealthy family members' money. They haven't worked for it. They haven't invested it. They haven't done anything in regards to trying to attain that money. But because that is their family member by right, they feel that because they've had to struggle their whole life and their family member has not, they are entitled to their money. Think of a pouty, whiny person who is kind of sullen / melancholy, anxious, and depressed majority of the times. Pouty and whiny like King Ahab, who wouldn't eat and turned around and faced against the wall when he found out Naboth was not giving him his vineyard, right? Then when it comes to the vulnerable narcissist, in the beginning of the relationship, they share a lot of vulnerable information in order to pull you in, right? Because you think, wow, especially if you're the person that kind of held back, right? And you came from that whole family line of what happens in this house stays in this house. And so you don't want to tell anybody your business, right? But with the vulnerable narcissist, they start telling you about every single bit of information and trauma that they've endured their whole entire life when you meet them. And you think that's a good thing, right? You're basically a little bit envious of them because you don't have that particular attribute just yet, right? But it's not a good thing when it comes from a vulnerable narcissist, right? But what happens towards the end of that relationship that you have with them, they start little by little pulling back on that information that they're giving you. That's how you know 9 times out of 10, they found a new supply. Once again, for the vulnerable narcissist, they've got a PhD in comparative suffering. Your mama died from 5 diseases, theirs died from 20. And of course, that's something major. It gets just that petty and ridiculous when it comes to them, right? Their mama died, your grandmother died, but theirs is more important because it was their mother's death, right? We are not inside of anybody's nervous system, so we cannot judge what kind of trauma, drama, inner turmoil, etc. that anyone is dealing with, right? But with them, it's always petty. It's always a one-upping situation, right? You and your kids have suffered at the hands of a grandiose narcissist or a psychopath, right? But they've suffered 10 times as worse with their kids, right? And them and their kids have 50 more problems than you and your kids, according to them. The list could go on and on and on as far as the amount of things they're going to compare with you, right? 9 times out of 10, what makes it hard to realize that you are in contact with a vulnerable narcissist is that they have extreme CPTSD, compounded trauma, and it just seems like that individual with just so many problems and so much trauma that you end up feeling sorry for them, and you end up in like this never-ending hole with them of trying to help them, but they never can seem to move forward, right? That's another clue. Okay, they get so petty at times that in order to try to get back at you but not be very direct, I guess I would say, in saying and letting you know what they're doing, they're letting you know but not letting you know, so to speak, what they're doing. Say, for instance, if they know that your kids are going on mission trips and doing other different activities with the church, then all of a sudden they will say, well, these churches, they need to focus on doing other things when it comes to ministry rather than sponsoring mission trips and overnight camps at the church. So they're talking about the church, right? They're using a third party, but they're really talking about you and your kids, right? It's an indirect attack to let you know they are not pleased with the fact that your kids get a chance to do something and their kids are not doing it. Although they could be doing it, but they chose not to what? They chose not to sign them up for these particular activities. So a lot of this stuff is like, wow, that must be nice that you're doing that. That must be nice your kids are doing that. Okay, all of that may seem true, but we all have choices in life, right? We all have decisions to make. And because this individual choose not to do this particular thing does not mean that they are better or worse than the other person. That's just what's what? Not on their priority list. But like I said, they will use third parties to get back at you. They find out you are doing something as far as giving your money to animal shelters, etc. All of a sudden, they'll start downing animal shelters. And that'll be a dig at you, but it'll be an indirect dig, if you know what I mean, right? Now take all of these issues I just talked about with the vulnerable narcissist. And in order for you to add the cerebral vulnerable narcissist to it, you got to add all of these features on to what I just shared with you, right? You got a cerebral vulnerable narcissist because of cerebral, meaning what? The brain. They believe that they are smarter than anyone else, including God, every professional that exists in the entire world. And then they will say something like, well, I know that the Bible says that in order to be considered married, you got to come into covenant with one another. But we've already had a baby together, so we're already in covenant, right? So they will go from one extreme to the other. 1 minute, they are self-loathing and like self-deprecating behavior. The next minute, if a baby was out of wedlock, you would think that they were Mary having the baby Jesus. It goes from one extreme to the other, right, with their behavior. And then so like a nut, we will sit there over what I just mentioned about the marriage and being in covenant because they had a baby together. We will sit there debating something that we already know isn't the truth, but as if it's the truth with them, right? Because it's something about that sixth sense in them and that cerebral side and them being so haughty and arrogant about this knowledge they have, there's some kind of way that energy that's emitted from them makes you want to almost believe that they're telling the truth. When you know what they're doing is wrong, you know what it is sin. You're not judging, but you're thinking like in your head as they're telling you this, wait a minute, oh yeah, I see what they're saying. And then all of a sudden the other side of you is like, wait a minute, this is still sin. How are they making it justifying what it is they're doing? Cerebral vulnerable narcissists will justify what they're doing, and they'll do it using their what? Using their intelligence, right? To go at you and get you, and you won't even realize they're doing it. Well, I know Dr. Thomas says that spiritual health is to have an emotional health side to it, and you can't have one without the other. But if you just quote the scriptures, God can work a miracle in your life, and that doesn't even have to apply. You know what I'm saying? It don't even have to apply to what's truth in that book. He can work the miracle and take away all of that from you. And then you're sitting there thinking, wait a minute. And once again, you're getting caught up in what they're saying. You just apply the scripture verses. You can have a miracle and all this. And we know God can work miracles. We know that that part is true. And at the same time, they're doing nothing but what? Feeding you some mess to get your mind off of the reality of the fact that they don't want the responsibility of doing their self-work, right? They don't want to do that. They want to keep on in their sin. They want to keep on using their victimhood and all the situations they've gone through, right, as a trap for you to feel sorry for them, right? And use that as a way to one up as well so that they don't have to be responsible for doing any kind of work, any kind of self-improvement. They want it to be status quo. They do not want to do any work. And that's another way you know that that's a vulnerable part, the vulnerable narcissist, because when they've been in a relationship with a grandiose narcissist, the grandiose narcissist will literally cause them all kind of trauma. But the vulnerable narcissist cannot seem like, for some reason, that they just cannot move forward. That's the only way to put it. They cannot move forward. And then the envious spirit, and that spirit of jealousy creeps in because they're what? Envious and jealous of other people who are moving forward, and they can't figure out why they can't get out of the circle, so to speak, that hamster wheel, that merry-go-round that they're in, right? And so what gets them, and could actually literally end up being the death of them in some situations, is that they believe they know more than God. They know more than the professionals, right? And that belief, unfortunately, when it comes to their physical health, when it comes to emotional health, when it comes to their spiritual health even, it can go on dangerous ground, right? They can end up getting involved with all kind of spirits of divination, all kind of things they're taking themselves instead of going to the doctors, all kind of different things that they're doing other than going and seeking professional help, because Satan has infused a spirit of self-deception in them, that they are so smart and they've one-upped everybody, including God. It's sad and it's true, right? And so the cerebral vulnerable narcissist will use their knowledge and that of their children to one-up you in every area that there is. And once again, they might not directly attack you, but they will indirectly. Well, I know, your child is gifted, in music, but mine knows the science of music. And I know your child is gifted in dancing, but my child knows how to go and dissect all of the levels of dancing, including ballet and tap and point and jazz and lyrical and opera. And I mean, they will add, if yours is doing 5 things, theirs is doing 50 things, right? With the cerebral vulnerable narcissist. So not only will they play on you in the victimhood area, the vulnerable part of it, but the cerebral side will be in the knowledge of things, right? Will be one up in that area. They will use big words to appear smarter. They will falsify resumes and jobs and education to get hired. Cerebral vulnerable narcissists would also have the knowledge of something, but they may not necessarily have the experience or understand it. But they have that false empathy that makes them appear to know